Good morning to Psalm 63. As is often the case for me, my knowledge of Psalms is often linked to a song. And that's appropriate because Psalms are largely composed as musical poems. And the musical meant that they were sung, often to instrumental accompaniment. And so many of the kind of Jewish mantras, the lines that are repeated over and over, particularly identified with the Hasidic table of Saturday late afternoon, where spirited singing transitioned from Shabbat. There are many of these phrases of Psalms that were put to music. And as I got to looking at this morning's Psalm, Psalm 63, what I knew and could hear is a piece of music. So I begin with this as hopefully it'll come up here. One second. Oh man.
We are being censored. America's news outlets no longer provide the truth.
Second.
I'm Joshua Phillip, senior investigative reporter with the Epoch Times.
All right, here we go. Verse 3 and then verse 2 of Psalm 63. Verse 2. Okay. So that is a song that I know. And as you can hear, it has a quality of, well, in that case, it's yeshiva students in Jerusalem. So there's a quality of this testosterone singing of joyfulness. Those kinds of songs are done as mantras, meaning a phrase is repeated over and over to create an ecstatic kind of mindset in that case. Again, that's verses 3 and then 2 of Psalm 63. Though when we will read this psalm together, for me at least in its introduction, it's not that quality of dancing. This is a psalm in which the psalmist recounts a longing for God, b'mishmerot, in the night watches. So in contrast, the composition of this psalm seems to be a priest who, in the midst of the night, on shifts of service to the temple, has this romantic yearning for God. And it has an echo of Song of Songs, of the longing of lovers. And here, it seems to be a priest, but others, because of the introductory verse, will identify it with David. And in fact, the Zohar, in its commentary to Parshat Truma, says that David was exemplary, pointing to this psalm in his ability to have a gift for ecstasy even when in danger. Again, that's the tension between, do you take the introduction literally as context, as is traditionally done, or do you see this as a later composition linked in some way to David in terms of yearning? And with that, let me pull up Psalm 63. And as is our way, I will read and translate, and then go back and describe some of the poetic dimensions of choices of words. But more and more, what I want to keep in mind is the question of how is this psalm relevant to us? I will add that one of the early church fathers, the Archbishop of Constantinople in the 4th century, John Chrysostom, said of Psalm 63, "The spirit and soul of the whole book of Psalms is contracted into this psalm." And the early church, perhaps guided by Archbishop Chrysostom, would begin their morning psalms until about the time of the death of Chrysostom, each day reciting Psalm 63. My spirit thirsts for you. A psalm of David when he was in the Judean desert. God, my ale are you. I search for you. My spirit thirsts for you. My flesh yearns for you in a land parched and exhausted, without water. Yes, in holiness I have envisioned you, beholding your might and your glory. For better is your loving kindness than life. My lips praise you. Yes, I will bless you with my life. In your name I will lift up my palms, as with marrow and fat. My spirit is satisfied with lips of joyful song. My mouth praises you. When I remember you upon my couches, in the night watches, I meditate on you. For you have been a help to me, and in the shadow of your wings do I joyfully sing. My spirit cleaves after you. Your right hand supports me. And those for desolation, they who seek my spirit, they will enter into the depths of the earth. Let them be gutted by the sword. May they become prey for the jackals. And may the king rejoice in God. Everyone that swears by him, the king, shall exalt, for shut are the mouth of liars. Well, most of this psalm is an expression of yearning. And then at the end, verses 10, 11, and 12, there's that familiar shift to focusing on the threat of enemies. But here in this psalm, the enemy is in the background rather than the foreground. And in the foreground is this intense expression of love of God. And so we begin at the outset saying that the inscription, Psalm of David when he was in the Judean desert, is unclear. He was in the Judean desert at different times in his life, though it's often identified with when he was fleeing Saul, which we saw in Psalm 54 as part of the introduction in reference to Ziph, a name of a particular desert. First book of Samuel, chapter 23, which is how Rabbi David Kimchi, whose name we keep coming back to, Narbonne, France, 1160 to 1235, how Rabbi David Kimchi understands this inscription. There's an interesting poetic device that I did not point out, so I will now. I didn't lose my chance, because it occurs in Psalm 55, verse 17, Psalm 56, verse 4, and here it begins with verse 2, and here's the poetic device. The first 4 words all begin with the letter Aleph. It's almost a poetic flourish to say this is a start, so that Aleph, which is also a silent letter, is being repeated 4 times. Elohim, Eli, Ata, Ashcharecha. Elohim. There are different names for God, and Elohim is the generic God. It's also, as we've seen in other Psalms, used to be a word for people who have authority. If you will, it's a job description. God of authority, God who administers justice, also used in regard to justice. The word El, Eli, my God, El is a common name for God. Sometimes it's translated as Almighty. It is the name used by Israel's neighbors as well in Canaan as the name for God. So God, Eli, my God, my supreme one, my almighty, Ata. And this begins, with a personal quality of you and me. Eli, Ata, my El, you are, Ashcharecha. Ashcharecha, commonly translated as I search for you, has as its root dawn, D-A-W-N, shachar. So Rashi will say, you are my God, each dawn I will seek you. The Targum, the early Aramaic translation, and Ibn Ezra will have it as Ashacharecha, like dawn. It's a repeated request, a renewed request. So there's the sense of the psalmist working at night, and it also has this sense of trajectory. You are my God, you are my dawn, you are the light that I know will yet always in a cyclical way return to me. Now it shifts to this somatic longing. Sama, lecha nafshi, thirsting for you is my spirit, my life. Kama lecha vesari, and the word kama literally means how much for you is my flesh. But the context is in yearning. And the word kama is for intensity, according to the Malbim, though in an early rabbinic play on this verse, Bereshit Rabbah, the early rabbis of Israel, will see the word kama as an expression of kimahin, mushrooms. Just like mushrooms, they will say, receive moisture from the air. Even when I am in a dry place, from breathing the Spirit, breathe in the moisture of life. So that's a word play. But what we gain is the sense of this intense yearning, that it's like a thirsting in a land parched and exhausted, bli mayim, without water. And the commentators will, like Radak and Ibn Ezra, say it refers to a metaphor for earth, and because he's in the desert, right? He's in the Judean desert. But others say, like Samson Raphael Hirsch, he's describing himself as the parched land. He is feeling a yearning for God as if he was without. But then it's Cain. But yes, in reference to my yearning, in reference to my thirst, but Kodesh Chasidicha, in holiness I have envisioned you. And Chazon is a prophetic vision. So I have envisioned you. Commentators usually say in the sanctuary, I have seen you, as if he's now reflecting backwards. But as you know, in this Hebrew, there's only two tenses, and the past is also the present, as is the imperfect, which is the present, and the future. Those are the two tenses. And so this can be in the current dash past. I have envisioned you, beholding your might and your glory. And the rabbis will contrast might, oz, strength, power, with kavod, God's intimacy. And so the Talmud will say in Megillah 31a, wherever you find God's oz, God's strength, there too, in that place, you'll find God's gentleness. And commentators will point to asking for God's might and glory as asking for God's strength and gentleness. And now to move a little bit more fluidly. For better is your loving kindness than life. My lips praise you. Chasidecha mechayim, better is your loving kindness, can also be understood as better is your faithfulness than life. And that can be understood, better is my connection spiritually than my physicality, animal life. It can be understood as better is your kindness as the goal or purpose from all aspects of my life. As my lips praise you. Again, qualities of physicality. Cain, yes, I will bless you with my life. In your name, I will lift up my palms. Lifting up one's palms, there too are images of the priest. So verse 3, yes, in the holy shrine. Verse 5, yes, I as a priest lift up my palms in prayer. And now verse 6, as with marrow and fat, chelev deshen. Deshen is the abundance of the fields. Chelev can be the hard fat on an animal, the suet, the fat that covers the kidneys. It can be just fat. And as a result, there are many different translations of that phrase, from delicacies of fat to fat and rich fare. I actually used the King James Version translation of marrow and fat in verse 6. I like the sense of marrow in terms of the inner quality, and fat being the outer quality of that which is succulent. My spirit is satisfied, inner, with lips, outer, of joyful song, rinanot, which will get repeated, you'll see in verse 8. My spirit cleaves to you. And this notion of cleaving, 1 second, I got ahead of myself. Verse 7, when I remember you upon my couches, and it's pointed out that it's in the plural. And a classic commentator will say that's because it's David and he's constantly needing to move around in the desert. He has no one set place to sleep. So the couches is in the plural. When I remember you upon my couches, or it could be the priest, whether he's sleeping in the temple or sleeping at home, in the night watches. In the Bible, there's descriptions of 3 night watches of the priest taking turns, among other things, keeping watch on the fire of the altar that it never goes out. Egebach, I will meditate on you, which is often translated as I will pray to you. But more commonly, because there are other words for prayer, Ege is meditate. I will reflect. I will be focused on you. Because, for, you have been a help to me, and in the shadow of your wings do I joyfully sing. And here too, a double entendre. The image of the wings, which can either refer to an image we've seen before in Psalms of God's protective wings, or it can be the wings of the cherubs in the Holy of Holies over the Holy Ark. Again, another priestly image in the shadow of your wings, meaning knowing that you hover between the wings of the Ark. There, I joyfully sing. And again, we can imagine the priest now on top of the holy Temple Mount, a place that during the day is a place of song, of instruments, of bustle, now quiet, and yet he, the priest, feels and hears in this holy space the emerging or resonating with joyful song. Verse 9, my spirit, nafshi, dafka acharecha, cleaves, attaches after you. Bi tamcha yaminecha, your right hand supports me. There's a tender quality to his right hand, the hand of strength, supporting him. But the rabbis will point out in reference to verse 9 that here there is, back to the close reading of the Hebrew, acharecha, my spirit cleaves after you, meaning my spirit pursues you to attach to you. And the rabbis will comment that when one seeks out God, so the Zohar will comment on this verse, then God will hold on to you. So when you seek to cleave, God will place God's hand and pull you close. This being the proof text for that. And now the shift in the last few words to the enemies. In regard to the Zohar, I just mentioned, just because I like to be cite sources, the Zohar in the first book, chapter 163, contemplate this verse. When a person seeks to cleave to the Blessed Holy One, God grasps him, never abandoning him. And the word to dafka, to cleave, will be in Hasidus for the folk mystics from the 18th century on, a key goal, divekut, the clinging to God, the seeking a unity of God by cleaving to God. So now the last 3 verses, the shift to enemies. And those for desolation, Shoah, that's the Hebrew word used popularly in Hebrew for the Holocaust. It's referred to a experience of desolation, Shoah, devastation. And those for desolation, they who seek my spirit, they will enter into the depths of the earth, with the biblical image of Korach getting swallowed in the Bible by the earth. Or enter into the depths of the earth means enter into death, enter into the lowest parts. Let them be gutted by the sword. The word yigiruha is an unusual word. It's mentioned in Lamentations 3, verse 49 in reference to liquids. So some will translate them, let there be cause for their blood to flow by the sword. Others will say split apart. I like the translation of gutted. May they become prey for the jackals. Some will translate it as foxes, but jackals, unlike foxes, eat carcasses. And also I have the image of jackals howling at night, more frightening kind of image. And the greatest, desecration of a person's life is for their body to be eaten by scavengers and never to be buried. So that's the curse of verse 11. Let them, those enemies, be gutted by the sword. May they become prey for the jackal. And the concluding verse, and may the king rejoice in God. Now, everyone that swears by the king shall exult, for shut are the mouth of liars. And here there's ambiguity. Literally, it reads, and may the king rejoice in God. Everyone that swears by him shall exult, for shut are the mouth of liars. And what we don't know is who, again, is being referred to. Some say, like Rashi, that this is King David speaking. That's, again, the introduction. And the tension is King David is still not the king when he's in the desert in that earlier image. He's being chased by King Saul. But Rashi will say, yeah, but Saul had earlier anointed him. So, he's praying for himself. Other later commentators, the important Italian commentator, Sforno, 1475 to 1550, says this is David speaking, but on behalf of King Saul. Many commentators, or most, will see the second king as God. Everyone that swears by God shall exult, for shut are the mouth of liars. And the concluding comment, and then I'll pull this together, and that's of another commentator, Mitsuda David, who was the rabbi of Prague, born in 1687 to 1769. And he will say that this is King David, and may the king rejoice in God, may King Saul, but may everyone that swears by King, but everyone that swears by God shall exult, for shut are the mouth of liars. And he'll say, again, this is almost 300 years ago, I do not suffer most from Saul, but from liars who slander me to Saul and invite his wrath with false tales about me. When these villains are silenced, my men and I will rejoice. So that the closing image is the supports of lying to the authority, to the king, are those whose mouths, because it's in the plural, dovrei sheker, the mouths of liars. A closing image on the word shaker, which is the Hebrew word for lying or liar, 3 letters. Can you see it? The shin, kuf, and resh. Here's I believe it's a Hasidic play on how it looks. The shin is grounded with its hands up. It seems to be presenting itself in stable ways. But behind appearances, the shin is a kuf and a resh, both standing on one leg, which means behind the appearance of solidity is that which is most shaky. So just a little play on the Hebrew letters of a lie, sheker. So let me pull this together and say that this is a psalm ultimately in which it seems to me that it's of a priest at night in service to God, hearing the sounds of celebration during the day, knowing that the dawn will yet emerge with a quality of regularity in creation. And there's this love of God as this source of that predictability, as a focal point of praise, of rejoicing. And the psalm is one of quiet celebration, rather, and it may be ecstatic, but in a meditative kind of quiet way, in contrast to the song with which I opened, which is a circle dance that drew on lines 3 and 4. That song began, "Yes, in holiness I have envisioned you, beholding your might and your glory. My spirit thirsts for you, my flesh yearns for you." So with that, I welcome some of your reactions to this love psalm, "My spirit thirsts for you," Psalm 63. Alex, and then Marvin.
At the risk of being a little political, I'd add another line to the very end. "For shut are the mouths of liars, and their Twitter feeds canceled."
Yeah, we've expanded the ways mouths can communicate today. Yeah.
Okay.
There is, we've seen that from the Psalms last week, that the danger is often identified with the danger of the mouth, to stir up hatred. In this case, the implication of those who surround the king stir up hatred against David.
Yeah.
And there's a weave, the image of, is this by the king? Is this by King David? Or is this a priest? For the priest, there is such identification with King David as the singer of Psalms, and his life being that life in relationship with God, that Psalms often are this intermingling of images of the priest drawing on the past. Marvin, and then perhaps Richard, who's unmuted. So Marvin, go ahead.
Mute. I was just thinking about verse 8, where it says, "Shadow of your wings." And that reminds me of the Elmo Rachamim, which is the same words for God to take into your wings for the person who was passed on.
Yeah, Utzel kanafecha la'olamim, we say in the El Malay. May you, for the person who's passed on, bring that person under your wings. I'll add that image appears 3 times in Psalms. 2 we've already seen, Psalm 17:8 and 57:2. In that it's a reoccurring image, but it's only in this case that for the first time, due to a commentary, that I was made aware that it's not only, as in the El Malay, an image of God as the protective mother bird, but also an image of a priest envisioning the holy ark with the cherub wings as the concentrated place of God's immanence.
Yes.
And so both are at play here.
I can see that, yes.
Yeah. Richard, did you?
I was just kind of playing with my space bar to exercise the unmute because I hadn't really used it that much. However, having said that, verse 6 tends to stand out for me to some degree as a literary mechanism. The way he's using, as with the marrow and fat, the spirit satisfied, and with lips of joyful song, my mouth praises you. The idea of starting from the inside and moving out, and the core of one's being becomes expressed in what we say and how we express it. Anyway, that was my thought there.
Well, that's beautiful. And, it goes from the inward to the outward both in terms of marrow and fat and spirit and lips. There's one other piece here to note, and that is that when he sings joyful song, that assuages his hunger, his spiritual hunger. So that's also the double entendre that's at play in this verse, that the only thing that has changed is his ability to express his love of God, and that assuages his yearning for God. A closing thought, and then I'll pull it together. Anybody?
Hey.
Hal, go ahead.
Hi. At the beginning this morning, you talked about music and the psalm, and that brings back in my own life memories. Memories always fade away, but what remains are memories that are highlighted. And so for me, going back to my childhood in 1940s at a Jewish boys camp in Stockbridge Bowl in the Berkshires, Friday night services outside, so peaceful, and we sang Glee Reigns in Galilee. And so that memory is so vivid that it encompasses a whole era, whole time in my life. And this song and what you were saying about it, and this psalm brings back those memories. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Say the quote again, Hal.
Glee reigns in Galilee. The Galilee rejoices.
And was that sung at night?
On Friday evenings, yes. That's one of them.
So thank you for that image that for you so defined that experience of youth and continues to nurture you with, again, the way that music and a song can take another moment and carry us wherever we are to feel that emotional experience of a place and a time. And for me to pull Psalm 63 together, there is a place and time that I'm identified with first in its own composition, and that's the sense of the holiness of the temple by a priest at night on watch, feeling this privilege and longing for God, hearing song as yearning, resonating from the day, and his own yearning for God, his own love of God, personified God, is a physical quality. It's like a thirst that is satisfied by hearing the songs and directing that love toward God, after God. There's a sense of acharecha, of pursuing God as the lover just out of reach, and yet the sense of the lover reaching back to provide comfort. I've had rare moments in my life of feeling love flow through me as a vessel, moments of prayer with others, of goosebumps, where people are united in a psalm sung to God. A hard to characterize physical sensation of love that is reflected in this psalm. My spirit thirsts for you. Tomorrow, Psalm 64 is back to the tongue, back to Alex's regard. It's a psalm focused on the enemy who is a liar, who uses a tongue like a sword, aims bitter words like a arrow. So Psalm 64 is a psalm against liars. That's for tomorrow. For now, we return to Psalm 63, the sense of quietude at night, the sense of romantic loving the Supreme Being. I invite anybody who would wish to honor a loved one to now join in the saying of Kaddish as we provide the opportunity to honor loved ones. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Bi'alma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute. V'chayechon u'vyomechon uv'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala v'zman kari v'imru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabba mevarach le'olam omei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yita'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudsha barichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran bi'alma v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Osei shalom b'mramav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen.
Amen.
Thank you each for joining together. Have a good day.